My name is Andrea Wallace. I'm the Vice President of Artistic Affairs and the Director of Photography. So I'm happy to welcome you here tonight for our second night of faculty lectures this week. Before we get started, if you have a cell phone, if you could just silence it. Anderson Ranch acknowledges that our campus resides on the traditional and ancestral territory of the Ute people, who have called the Roaring Fork Valley and beyond home for over 800 years. We are excited tonight to spend the next hour with two wonderful artists, Leticia Bajuyo and Kris Graves. After both artists speak, we will follow with a 15-minute Q&A. Leticia is our first speaker tonight. Leticia Bajuyo creates visual poems, drawings, sculptures, and site-responsive installations that are inspired by, sorry, it's that time of day, cyclical patterns and byproducts of human ingenuity. Her continued research of cultural privilege and internalized pressures of assimilation yields artworks that portray visions of comfort, containment, and control. She received her BFA from the University of Notre Dame and an MFA from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. She began creating art at Metropolis, Illinois, long before realizing that what she was tinkering with could be called art. She presently creates, lives, and teaches in Norman, where she is assistant professor in the School of Visual Art at the University of Oklahoma. Recent residencies include Fountainhead Residency in Miami, Sculpture Trails Outdoor Museum in Indiana, Franconia Sculpture Park in Franconia, Minnesota, and at the From Waste to Art Museum organized by Tamiz Shahar, JSC, in Azerbaijan. In addition to her participation in Land Report Collective and exhibitions of her individual work, she seeks community and welcomes collaboration by participating in collectives such as the Project Vortex, TLC Art Collective, Artists of Houston, and ENID, N-E-N-I-D, Generations of Women Sculptors. Please welcome Leticia Bajuyo.
Thank you so very much, and thank you to Anderson Ranch for including me today to this week and to be part of your faculty this summer. It's been an absolute pleasure. As noted, I have a background in a variety of areas, and what you're seeing right now is a screenshot of my website. I encourage you, if you would like to see more things, I'm just including a few notes. And the title of my talk tonight is Stories. I love stories. I like to think of myself as a storyteller, and I seek everyone else's stories. So to share a few things about my story, my first thought was, where am I, as far as why am I here? How did I even get to come to Anderson Ranch, to have this privileged opportunity? And it all comes from an opportunity I had 2 years ago. And so you just mentioned I had a residency at Fountainhead in Miami, Florida. And some of you from Anderson Ranch might recognize Anna Sukalarkis. Anna and I and Elisa were roommates for a whole month in Miami and got to know each other really well during that month. And sometimes when these opportunities, these stories start to overlap, then those people become part of your story, part of your landscape. And they've become part of mine as we continue to stay in touch. And I'm grateful that when Anna was a resident here, or as a teacher here last summer, she recommended me to get to be here. So it's thanks to her. But how do I get to Fountainhead? And so something I was thinking about stories, we don't just land into these things evolve. And so that evolved from this group. And so I didn't even know about Fountainhead. I didn't know that was an opportunity. I didn't think that I would be fit for it. And Robert Chambers, who's in the top there, this is our Young Arts crew. Some of you might not know about Young Arts. I encourage you to check it out. Young Arts Foundation is based in Miami, Florida. It's for 15 to 18-year-olds, and it's for artists across 12 different disciplines: dance, music, visual arts. So we are the visual arts adjudicators. We're the final, we look at the last 250 applications of 1,500 applications a a year. So that's a lot of art. We choose the top 20, and they get to travel to be with us in Miami, and we're their master teacher group. Other artists come in and work with them. And so this is our crew. We love working together, and so we continue to stay in touch throughout the year. Joshua Klaus, Lonnie Johnson, Robert Chambers, we just really long to get to be together each year. And during COVID, we worked together on Zoom for hours and hours to work with these young students. And they continue to stay in touch with us over the years. So I encourage you to check out Young Arts. But if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have gotten to Fountainhead. If I hadn't gotten to Fountainhead, I wouldn't be here with you. So part of this story is that lineage. How did I get to Young Arts? That it also has a story behind it. So Young Arts, I used to be on the board for National Performance Network, and it used to be National Performance Network and Visual Arts Network. I was on the board with them for a number of years because before then, I got an exhibition and a residency with Women in Their Work Gallery down in Austin, Texas. I created this sculpture for them. And to do that, I got a grant from NPN Van. Well, then I started participating in NPN Van. I got to go to their conference. They have like the coolest conference ever. It's like the secret party of all conferences. I encourage you to go. It's rocking. Getting to be on their board was a wonderful time. It was really like a really powerful experience because what they do, they're a re-granting agency. And so they have about 85 to 89 partners across the country between all the different fields, and then they re-grant to them. Women in the Work Gallery is one of their re-granting agencies, and Young Arts would go to their conferences. So I got to know the people at Young Arts, the coordinators of that, by being on the board, presenting on the board, helping coordinate, and next thing I know, I get an invitation, so that means so much. But this project here, I just loved making this piece for Women in the Work Gallery. It has 2 horns. One of the things I've been making since 2009 are CD sculptures. And so this opportunity came out of the blue. So Lisa Chinaki, who was their curator at the time, was just Google searching other artworks to bring in. And so she happened to come across mine. She was looking for something that was recycle-based. So I recycled donated CDs and DVDs to make these types of sort of quilts that are combined memories, but instead of combining memories of like say past fabric, I'm combining memories of your past music, your past favorites. But we as a fickle society, our favorite song yesterday, not our favorite song tomorrow. Our favorite movie this year, I hate it next year. Maybe there's a few that we can hold on to, but especially as we have more and more opportunities to download everything, we don't need CDs. But the way I think about CDs, they're still showing up, they're still doing their job. We're the ones who changed, and so I want to give them another spot, another moment. And so this is what I do. And inside these boxes, there's another one on the other side, you can't see each other. This is a theremin in here, and so when you wave your arms over the antenna and you break the radio waves, then you're creating sound that comes out of it. But how did that happen? So the story behind that, the CD sculpture, that came about years of sort of like experimentation. No one ever taught me how to make art out of a CD. I basically weave the biggest, most awkward sock out of CDs. But I found like 40 ways, I was telling my students this the other day, like 40 ways not to make art out of a CD, and I found 1 or 2 really good ways. But this is the original version as I was struggling to figure out how does this go together? How do I make a tail? And so when I was doing it this way, I had 2 hula hoops, and I make my own hula hoops out of irrigation tubing. If you ever want to learn how to make a hula hoop, I can show you all the ways. And so it was 2 hula hoops. I was like trying to tie them to the walls, and because I wanted to make this like basket-like horn, and it was not working. They kept collapsing. And another artist comes into the shared space I was in, and they're like, "Why don't you just hang it vertically?" What? I was like, "Oh my God, that's a great idea!" And so this is to this day. How I continue to do these. I put a hula hoop at the top and I make these baskets and then I weave them together until they're strong enough to be able to be carried around like that, and that's what gets suspended. Until I can lift them up and then I fill in the gaps and I can like make all kinds of like roller coasters of sculptures out of these CDs and DVDs. Most of these sculptures are temporary, sometimes they're long-term, occasionally they're permanent installations at museums, and I love getting to do them because these are materials that weren't meant to be art. They were meant for other types of consumption, as far as DVDs and CDs. Irrigation tubing is what carries water to our yards underneath the ground. We don't think about it until it breaks. Ratchet straps, cable ties, all of those materials come together to make these pieces. Here's one that's at this is a permanent one in South Bend Museum of Art. And so this is a 30-foot sculpture. The framework in the permanent one switches to aluminum. This one has no sound that comes out of it, but you imagine sound. And people try to yell in one side to see if it'll work. I want to share another one of my favorites. This is at the Indianapolis State Museum. People are always like, how do you build these? And so this one took about 9 months in development, and so we designed, I worked on this plan, worked with the museum as far as where it would go. This is at the entrance of the museum, and they're like, you cannot touch our wall. This is like this perfect aluminum brushed wall. There, do not touch the wall. And then the floor slopes and the ceiling slopes upward at this like unusual degree that you cannot predict. So we had to come up with a way to be able to adjust to it. So it was about 8 days on site. I'm on that scissor lift day in and day out to be able to get this done along with my team. And so the basket pieces are pre-made, and then they get brought to the site. The overall design is pre-planned, but I leave some room for me to be able to still be creative on site as far as like which CD goes next to which one, what colors are together. And then this one had lights inside of it that change over a minute, goes through 360 colors. So I love that one. 16,000 CDs and DVDs. So discs show up now. They show up in my mailbox. People know that I do these, so if you happen to be cleaning out your closet, you know where to take them. And then I just want to share one more, because this is the one that is on the website. So this was the only one of these I did during COVID, because during COVID it was really hard to work in a team in this way at the time, and so I could only have 2 gallery assistants with me at a time to be able to build this. This one has 2 theremin that are 8 feet apart, and so you could, so that way they're socially distanced. 2 people could play it at one time, but then you could also try to stretch and reach to each side. And so here's somebody, this one, unfortunately, this audio didn't have sound, but you can see how one person could stretch, and so the title of it's Tethered Oscillator. As you're being pulled back and forth, you're the oscillator, you're the thing that's shifting back and forth as you're pulled in 2 different directions, and as the sound would work, then the sound would come out, those 2 horns on both sides of you. But for one with the sound, this is in Corpus Christi, Texas, at the Performing Arts Center. So that's the theremin being played. Right? And so for me, this ethereal sound, but the whole history, the whole story, I'm not going to spare you the story about the theremin, but I find the theremin fascinating as an invention that never took off. But it found a few sort of ways that it was desired, and so the elements of like what's desired and what's discarded is something that I spent a lot of time like really thinking about, as noted in my bio, and I was thinking about like what is assimilation, what do we try to fit into, and who do we exclude in that process? What is it that we're trying to exclude in ourselves, or what is it that we're trying to gain from another ideation of what we want to be? But how does the CD start to be an icon for that, and how can it become something else, even if it's only momentarily treasured? And anytime I make any of those sculptures, I break thousands. Like all I get like on top of one of those ladders or the scissor lift, I drop one of those strands, they're all sewn together, pshoo, fractures. I save all the fragments and I make little sculptures like this. We've been doing this over in the classroom across the way if you want to come and take a peek. Oh, I think I'm funny. You guys can decide differently. But this one at the very top, it says, "You can't hurry, love." I found that one little fragment of a disc, and so that's the top, so you're trying to climb up the staircase. So as I sit amongst all the fragments, I'm looking for stories of color, but also stories of language that I can be able to pull out. Maybe there's sometimes imagery that I might want to like share, but all of them you can even see the drilled holes from when they used to be part of this other story, the other sculpture. And then this one, my studio assistants, I never saw the actual disc, thigh cream, we have it. I have no idea what was on this disc because it was broken by the time it got to me. When I'm going through these boxes, like, oh, I've got to make something out of this. So this one's all cut in half, and so on one side is Alicia Keys, because we have the key to whatever thigh cream is. And then something else I like to do, this is, I'm sharing these because this also relates back to Fountainhead, so looping back to that Fountainhead experience. I've been drawing on and collecting player piano rolls for quite a while now, since about, I guess it started in 2011, was my first collection component of player piano rolls. For me, the player piano roll is on the ancestral tree of the CD. It's memory of music that's embedded within a physical form to be shared. And so in the late 18th century, early 1900s, so this is our late 19th century, I messed that one up. Like I had it right the first time. Anyway, years. So as far as a way to be able to share data, I find the player piano to be fascinating. So what's going on is that if you're playing a player piano, you have the foot pedals, and as you press on the foot pedal, you're creating air that's pushed through the holes of the player piano. And so if it's a long hole, it presses down that note. It triggers the hammer on the piano to be hit longer. And so it's a deeper note, or it's a longer note, or it's a short note. And so the paper remembered it Like, what? How does this work? Humans invented this? And so I'm finding it fascinating, but then I don't have a player piano. So it's silent. I can't hear what this melody is. I have no idea what the song was about. But then I can also read. And so it's also the original karaoke. And so as someone would play that player piano, you would then read and you'd sing along. So this one's like, you say goodbye, dear, leave me with a smile. I don't know what the melody was because I don't know what the name of the song was, but I just really appreciate the way that language. So then I did a drawing in graphite of Cape Cod houses based on Brancusi's endless column going up, and then it's spilling out of this box. It's sealed with beeswax to be able to preserve it. So it's actually 2 layers of player piano to be able to have that density. Before then, before Fountainhead, I would draw on the player piano rolls and then frame them. And so Fountainhead, a residency like that where I didn't have a show at the end, I was just allowed to make. I'm like, you give me time to make? What? Kind of like this opportunity to be at Anderson Ranch. You're giving us time to connect and to make art and to learn new skills. That's such a gift to be able to share. And so Fountainhead did that for me, and I created this whole new direction of my work where I still do drawings on player piano rolls and frame them when they feel more like a document. They want to be saved. But in cases like this is a different kind of preservation. This one's 4 layers of player piano rolls that create a poem that you read around the edges, and it's all about, this starts out, birds sing these, and it continues. I don't know if you saw it, but I actually donated it to Anderson Ranch. So the reason this one's included, I donated this to Anderson Ranch to be part of the auction. I don't know if it already sold, but if it didn't, I would love for one of you all to donate and have this in your collection. And the last piece I wanted to share with you all, this was, I just finished this in April. But it took about 2 years in the making from the initial ask for me to be in this exhibition and this opportunity to the conclusion of it. And so this one is in just north of Houston. It's in Cleveland, Texas. It's a place called Splendora Gardens. Some of you may know James Searles. So James is from and has a house in Houston before he moved also to Colorado. He has a studio not too far from here. And he turned 80 this year. And so 2 years ago, he and Charmaine had this idea. They wanted to have this really large celebration about the Bower, about this land, what the land had given them. And so they started clearing out these sort of like circular galleries that they called Bowers, and they wanted to be able to have artists come in and install that. They teamed up with Diverse Works, which is another creative space that turns out was a member of National Performance Network and Visual Art Network. And so I've known of Diverse Works and Xandra Eden for years, and I'm really moved by the work that they do. And so when this started to come up, I'm so grateful that my name got floated to the top of one of the 10 artists that they invited to be part of this project. And so we got to go out there for a tour. And we had to do things like in this space, let me see if I can back up. So this is the Bower I chose. And we had a requirement to make it outdoor sculpture, so it had to be outdoor, live for 2 years, be able to survive Houston summers and winters, and to be interactive on some level. And then you had to collaborate with other people. You had to have some kind of performance or music or poetry element to it. All of these parameters. Some people might run scared. I love this. Those of you in my class know I think limitations make us limitless. When you give a tighter box, it allows for a way to program and problem solve that can't happen without that. And so it allows for a different story to start to evolve that might not happen if you just say, go make. And so rather than being open, I had sort of new things I had to include. And I'm so grateful to that push because it yielded this piece. So that's the Bower I chose. Whenever James Searles and I walked out to this Bower, let me jump forward. So there's James. That was the day that I went and looked at the Bowers. And so myself and two of the other artists are walking out. If you ever go there, my space, it's like a mile walk. It's summer in Houston. Those of you who've been watching the weather about Houston, it's not chilly at all. So we're walking, I'm tired. I'm getting tired and hot. And I'm trying to be really like optimistic, and inside I'm like, I just want to sit down. And that was the beginning of my design. I was like, I want a place to sit. But then I saw these benches, and I was so afraid that there'd be a spider or a snake. I was like, how can I make something that is interactive, that you could sit on, that you could also make sure that there's no spiders or snakes underneath you? And so that's where I started thinking about swing sets. I also have a daughter, and we had built a trampoline around that same time. Oh my gosh, that was hard to do. It was harder than building any of my sculptures, all the tension in those things. But then thinking about public parks versus private land and having your own swing set, what does that do when it comes to sharing and making community? And so the desire of the American dream is to have your own yard, to have that fence, to have these things that we want to acclaim. But then once you do, we set that trampoline up for her to play on by herself, but we have only one child. So she goes out there and jumps for a while, and then she just sits on the trampoline. And so I think about that, like, what does it mean to share, to be a part of a public space that you have to then have other people that you can't predict, or to have your own? I'm not saying that there's necessarily a pro or a con, but it's something I spend a lot of time thinking about in these spaces. And so when I was creating this, I was also thinking about roundabouts. I know some people in this room, Ruthie, who hate roundabouts. I'm working on this other sculpture for Fort Worth right now. It's a roundabout sculpture. And so to do the research for that, I was really thinking about, like, what is the design of the roundabout? Why do we do it? And why do people not like it? It's because we have to pay attention to other people. We have to make eye contact. You can't be looking at your phone, and you have to, like, really, like, watch where you're going. But it decreases the number of fatal accidents that can happen because you can just sideswipe somebody. It's very hard to have a full head-on collision on a roundabout, but you have to really pay attention. So with this sculpture that I designed, there's 20 swing sets, so 20 butts will fit in the sculpture, but you have to be really careful. So when you swing, you don't want to kick the person in front of you or get kicked in the butt behind you. So you have to make an agreement when you swing as far as, like, which direction you're going to go. You have to communicate. So it makes for a really fascinating experience to be in. But collaboration, I'm like, who do I want to collaborate with? And so one of the organizations I'm a part of is the Filipinx Artists of Houston. That it's been a really powerful group that has supported me and allowed me to have dialogues about that part of my identity, that not necessarily all of the work that I do really brings it up visibly, but it's often in all of my work. It just might be more of an inspiration within the work, but not everybody has to know it. But there is a group that can help me understand that other ways to be able to have that dialogue and how they've had that dialogue and different levels of it. And so this group has been a really supportive one, and it's made up of musicians, culinary artists, literary artists, and visual artists. And so I was like, I am going to invite all of them. And so they asked me to make one sculpture. I made them 21 sculptures. And so this is the crew. We had woodworking workshops, and this is the pieces that we made, and this is how it looked when it was done, with all the swings sitting there. So each swing is a portrait by them about the story that they wanted to tell. What did they want to share? The title of the piece is Duyan, which is swing. And so it's titled Swing Set Share a Share. And so what are you wanting to share? So that's what it looks like up close. Love these pieces. And this is what it looks like when you swing. Love it so much. Before this, it also required a performance. What did we want to do for the opening celebration? And so I reached out to a dear friend, Mary Lou Marico Carrera. She's based in Chicago. She's a performance artist, a dance artist, and a writer. And I was like, would you help me choreograph a piece for this? Can we write something? And so she wrote this story and performance titled Gamba. Gamba is the Philippine word for spider. And so it's a story about Gamba, which is this little girl that got turned into the first spider. And it's a story that our Lolas would tell us to basically scare us to behave. And so our Lolas are our grandmothers. And so it was a story that if you didn't, like, then, you know, you might get turned into a spider, and like why this little girl was turned into a spider. And so it was a story about, well, that's a really traumatic story. And so we wanted a second page of that story. And so the performance and all of these beautiful performers were our artists that are part of the Filipinx Artists of Houston, and we created a piece where Gamba comes into her own. So after she's turned into a spider, how does she find herself? How does she find community and belonging? And the woodland sprites show her how, but then she shows them how to weave back. Because she's a spider, she knows how to weave. And it also incorporates Kali, which is the Philippine stick fighting methods. So it adds that to it too. So if you would like to watch, I encourage you to go to Gift from the Bower. There's a recording of the performance that you can watch. And I encourage you to check out all of the other sculptures that were part of the Gift from the Bower installations. They'll be up for 2 years. And so I encourage you, if you happen to get down to Houston, or those of you from Houston, please go check it out. And then a couple more thoughts I wanted to share as far as stories. Land Report Collective that was mentioned earlier. This collective is another one that I'm really is a favorite of mine. Dialogues about land and landscape. It's 6 artists, but we've just added our 7th artist now, Casey, and Casey's based in Atlanta, and our next show is in August to September. It's in Birmingham, Alabama. So if you're in Birmingham, please come and check it out. We're going to be installing some land works there. And then another project, I started an archive with a dear friend and an amazing artist, Sabine Senth. She's based in San Antonio. And something I think about is, like, how can we create opportunities for others? And so I've gotten this opportunity to be able to make art and to be able to have ways to be able to have exhibitions, but can we bring in more people? How can we add more seats to the table? And so we started an exhibition called 24 Hours of Wonder. The first exhibition was last year in Berlin. The next one opens in August in Russellville, Arkansas. And so it's 24 artists were in the first one. And so Sabine invited 12 or 11 people. She was the 12th. I invited 11 people. I'm the 12th of my side. And each person was to make a record-sized piece that was then to be suspended in these circular forms. For Arkansas, we added another half day. So every time we show, we'll add another half day. These are donated to the project, and the archive continues to grow. And it's who do we want to share this space with? Who do we want to be a part of this archive with? And so as we make these records, what kind of record of wonder do we want to contain and retain? And this is where I'm at now. If you ever want to come and hang out in Oklahoma, I've been there for 1 year, and it's been a great landing. I cannot say enough good things about the School of Visual Arts. I'm grateful for them and the program that we've been able to sort of like bring me into. And we are actually bringing it back to Anna Tsoukalarkis one more time. I am bringing a conference there. I'm grateful to MidSouth Sculpture Alliance. I've been a board member with them for years. And Anna is our keynote speaker for the conference that we're having. And so it's October 6th through 7th, or it actually starts on the 5th. There's indoor and outdoor sculptures and exhibitions. We're going to be doing iron pour workshops, and then her amazing keynote. The registration is going to open soon. I encourage you to save the date and come and join me there. But it's also hybrid. So if you can't join us in person, you can register and join us online the whole time too. So with that, my last team I want to recognize is my family. This is Joshua Hamilton with a beard. He shaved it like the next day, but this is like a great picture. He's a poet, writer, and a Spanish teacher. And this is our daughter, Ida Beth. She's 11. She's decided she's over the art thing, and she's going to be a chef. She's in culinary camp right now. And so I can't be doing any of these things if it wasn't for them. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Our next artist is Kris Graves. He is an artist and a publisher based in New York and California. Using a mix of conceptual and documentary practices, he creates artwork that deals with societal problems and aims to use art to inform people about cultural issues. He also works to elevate the representation of people of color in the fine art canon and to create opportunities for conversation about race, representation, and urban life. Alongside his own practice, he developed Kris Graves Projects, a publishing house that collaborates with artists to create limited edition publications and archival prints, focusing on contemporary photography, works on paper that address issues of race, identity, equity, gender, sexuality, and class. He received his BFA from the Visual Arts from SUNY Purchase and has been published and exhibited globally, including the Museum of Modern Art, the Getty Institute in LA, the National Portrait Gallery in London, among others. Permanent collections include the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Getty Institute, the Schomburg Museum, the Whitney Museum, the Guggenheim, the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, the Brooklyn Museum, the list goes on. Please welcome Kris Graves.
All right. Okay. Hey, y'all. Thanks for coming. Let's see if this works. My name is Kris Graves. I'm from New York, Queens specifically. I went to school in the year 2000, undergrad. I don't have a grad degree, so it's just undergrad. I'm sure that most people have grad degree. Anyway, so I went to school in 2000 after my parents let me let me go to, oh, look at this. Oh, okay. My parents were both artists in high school, but then had to get real jobs because they were black in the 1980s and there was no black artists. Anyway, so they were like, yeah, you can go to art school, and I chose SUNY Purchase because one, it was probably the best, I thought it would be the best option for me. It was outside of New York City, and I figured that I wouldn't be able to actually pay attention if I was in New York City for undergrad, so it was a good idea. So the first influences of my career were Gordon Parks, who made photographs all through the 20th century. A lot of documentary photographs dealing with the racial divide in America. Also a photographer named Eugene Smith, or W. Eugene Smith, who made a lot of documentary work as well. I guess I was into documentary work then. Made a lot of documentary work in America and Spain during the war over there, and has had an amazing career. I was also interested in some very boring landscapes by dudes like, this dude's name is George Tice, a New Jersey photographer, or a New Jersey-based photographer. Is interested in art by a dude named Hiroshi Sugimoto, who is more conceptual. This photograph is taken, he did a project named Theaters. May seem very boring. I mean, I think there's people in there actually, but he would leave the exposure open for the full movie, and that's how he made these exposures, pretty much. That was the only light in the theater. Also interested in Gurski, Andreas Gurski, when I was like getting out of school, just because he was manipulating photographs in a way that I hadn't seen anybody else do. Plus the prints were bigger than this on the wall here today. So I was like very interested in like what that was. And then in school, I was just making work. So just trying to like, practice, get better at my craft. My parents kind of helped me with school a lot, but then I didn't have any extra money, so I kind of started to take in freelance jobs, which I have just continued on for the last 20 years or so. I went to a school that was a conservatory school, so they had like a huge dance program, so I would photograph dance performances, actors. There was theater program as well, so I was just kind of getting little jobs. Probably losing money because I was like shooting on 4:5 film and getting paid like $30, and then I'd be in a dark room for 6 hours. Anyway, it doesn't. Anyhow, it was cool because I was like kind of just learning how to deal with the clientele or something in the way. Got out of school, moved back to Queens, where I'm from, and started to photograph the development of this neighborhood. Our Western Queens is just developing crazy. Gentrifying is another word for it. And so I just kind of spent my time on a bike for years and years photographing Queens. Things that were gonna be gone, pretty much, is what I was trying to photograph. This is one of the only scenes that's actually still there, but all the buildings have changed in the background, and this fence, I mean, there's now 40 feet trees, so you can't even see the city from here. Things change quick in New York. They moved that whole Pepsi Cola sign just because they wanted to build a condo. Anyhow, so it's fun to look back at these pictures, actually. Things that are gone is what I've been photographing in Queens. And that was like my first stuff that I made after school because I was there and I had a bike and a camera, so I was just making these photographs. In 2007, I got a job at the Guggenheim Museum, photographing the collection and everything else at the Guggenheim pretty much for the next 11 years, full time. So I was responsible for all the art pieces that came in to photograph them. So I learned a lot from that experience. Also photographed some wild artists. This guy's name is Maurizio Catalan, who made this golden toilet and a bunch of other stuff that went to the museum. But yeah, you can see how fun he is. This is him, like he is this guy. I was like, can you just stand there for me? And this is exactly how he stood there for me. This is how he wanted. I did not ask him to do that. I was also responsible at the Guggenheim for photographing like portraits of staff, the shows that came through the museum, all of the art handlers and how they were putting together the works in the back end, like in my studio, off-site. I was there at night a lot, photographing like special events. They had this kind of signature machine where it would combine thousands of signatures and like keep putting them on the museum all night long. I was in there like just photographing like parties and shows. I was making Subway ads for them, so a piece of this was a Subway ad back in like 2007. I was responsible for a lot there. I mean, I was there at 2 a.m. when people are installing these cars. Like there's art handlers hanging from the ceiling, going into the cars to install lights and stuff. And I was like, I'm so glad I don't have to I'm glad that's not my job. My job is from the ground up, so it was great. Worked with some artists that I won't name because I don't like them. And, but, anyway, if you know, you know. This guy put a bunch of dollars in $100,000 bills and then got sued because somebody else did it before he did that. At the same time as working at the Guggenheim, I started that in 2007, and by 2009, 2008, the economy crashed, the housing market kind of crashed, and my cousin was leaving his job at a bank called Goldman Sachs, and he wanted to start a hedge fund, pretty much a money market funds, but he liked art, and he didn't want to like have just sit in an office by himself doing this business. So what we did is he worked in the back of this space, and I was able to like rent this gallery in the front with him at a very cheap cost because no one was renting anything. So we were pretty much like in Brooklyn paying $1,000 a month for a gallery. So we ran this gallery for 3 years, called it Kris Graves Projects. I did not want to call it that, actually. I would have chosen any other name, but and we had a program of works on paper and photography solo shows. Sometimes group shows, but mostly solo shows of people I consider that made great work. Yeah, so we did this for 3 years, had a bunch of shows, and then I realized that I hated running a gallery a lot, and I never wanted to do it again, so I started to think about another way to get art into people's homes. I mean, for me, all these pictures were too expensive to sell to people that I knew. I mean, I was running a gallery at 25 years old. I knew no one who could afford a $1,000 print at that point. So for me to sell things was pretty lucky. We did sell stuff, but definitely not enough. And at a point, I was like, the only way that I'm gonna get art into people's houses is books. So I started to think about how to make a book. This first book, however, was not getting into people's houses because it was enormous. It's called Guardians of Solitude by a photographer named Laura McPhee. And pretty much the book is, when it's open, is 16 by 40 inches. So I had to do probably 8 months of research to figure out who could even make a book that size. So I learned everything about presses, not everything, but a lot about presses, papers, where to make books all across the world, how much they cost. So I got a big taste of being a publisher even before I was actually a publisher. So we made this book with her, and it sold well. I mean, I still have some, so if you come to New York and you come to my studio, I will give you one. But you have to kind of bring it back on the plane, and it is enormous, so I'll just tell you that much. After making that book, I decided to make I made a small little book with a friend of mine, and then I started to just get into my own groove, trying to make, I wanted to start my company with my own books, because I like to self-publish, and it was the only way to actually make a book because no one was trying to publish my work. So for me, I was like, can I raise enough money to self-publish a book? I did a Kickstarter, made enough on the last damn day of the Kickstarter after 30 days, and was able to make this book named Permanence, which is pretty much, has anyone seen this recently? Has anyone been to Taos and seen this Family Dollar? If you live near here, please take a picture of this Family Dollar for me. I haven't seen it because it was not even open yet when I took it. But so yeah, this book is pretty much about 11 years of photography, visiting friends across the world on no money, and just kind of sleeping on their couches and going out when they were working, pretty much. This was my whole life for a decade. So I was able to see a lot. Because that book was successful, I made a second book the second year about Iceland. It's called Discovered Missing. And it was pretty much 3 trips around the Ring Road, which is the main island of Iceland, photographing accessible locations, places that people could actually visit, not just places that were in the middle of the mountains and no one could get to. I wanted to make something that, my friends, my family could actually see in the future. So it was kind of like a guidebook almost of this place. And I made some real, and I've never really been to I'm from the city, and I've never been outside of suburbs at this point. I was just this is the first time I saw land, pretty much. So Iceland was every 20 minutes the landscape changes. I mean, you're seeing black sand beaches, then glaciers, and then you're seeing just snowy and then more black sand beach. It's a crazy. I suggest going there, especially with children. And then after making those 2 books for myself, the next year I wanted to make a press. So I started to work with artists to make their own books. I can't name all these people. There's all on the website, and when a book sells out, I usually put the full book on the website so you can see it. This guy's name is Jason Hanasek, who is photographing a boy going through the junior army program in Virginia Beach, where they're both from, and dealing with masculinity issues within. Dude named Luke Abiel, who's a friend of mine. We visited Berlin together in 2007. He fell in love at first sight with this woman and came back to New York, quit his job, moved there for her for 8 years, had 4 kids. And anyway, so that's his story there. And we also wanted to start a program of poetry and photography books. So we made a book with a woman named Marilyn Rye. It's called Journey, and it's a poetry and photography book about her kind of trying to find her lost past in the Middle East, where she was born. After making those books and going into, I'm guessing, thousands of dollars of debt, I wanted to make books that were less expensive, that people could afford for even cheaper, because those books were $40, and I wanted to make things that were $20 or $30, because I just wanted people to have the book. So I made a little book of my own work, which was just work of 2013, I think, photographs named Provisional Scenery. I think people still think, a lot of people still tell me that this is probably the best book I've made, but I will have to disagree. After that, I started to get, in about 2014-15, a lot of black men were being murdered on tape by police officers. I mean, I don't know if you remember that, but that just was a wave for some reason of things happening. So at that point, I started to look inward and try to make photographs based on my peoples. This is not me, of course. This is just the first photograph in this series named Testament, where eventually I would surround people with 4 color changing LED light bulbs. I would sit for them, they would choose their own color combinations, and then we'd switch places and I photographed them in the color combination that they chose for themselves. So this was kind of the first piece of the project, and it was also, there's video content, and there's also a lot of written content in this project, so I decided to make a book of the work and the written content. One story goes throughout this book. And usually the stories are about discrimination, but they're microaggressions, so they're very, you could almost gloss over them as not being racist at all, but if you're involved in it, it feels racist. My wife saw that work and was like, you're just gonna shoot men? I mean, women are also dealing with this problem. So the next year, this is my sister, I photographed women for this project also, and the same deal. Did the same type of book, matched the book sizes a bit, and co-published with a college named Bryn Mawr, and had a show there with this work, and with all the work actually. But the work actually got better because I started using a light backdrop, which made color just flow everywhere instead of the black backdrop. That was a little change that made a huge difference. People actually looked at these things then. But yeah, then I started showing around. I told a story about like this woman named Brooke was running a gallery at the University of Arkansas, Tucson. And I just cold emailed her at like 2 a.m. one night. It was like, I love your gallery space. I'd like to show there. Here's the work that I make. The next day she called and said, I don't have space, but if I do at some point, I'll call you back. A week later, somebody dropped out of a show and she gave me a show. So for me, it was like I wanted to be in this enormous space. I couldn't afford to be in this enormous space. Therefore, I had to figure out a way to afford it. So pretty much I got like the cheapest paper imaginable, which is called like Epson Enhanced Matte or Enchanted Matte is what I call it. But the good thing about it is most papers, if you shine light on them, they will glare. Like especially good photo papers, this paper's super flat and it still has a good contrast. So it was perfect for this like taping on the wall after every show. I have them rip them up and send me a picture of a pile of ripped prints, pretty much. That's how the show ends. Yeah, so that was a good way to show because that whole wall probably cost me like $300 to print. So that was like the best way for me to, and there was also big pictures in the show, but it was cheap because of this wall. I'm always making my own books. This is called Oblique Reality. And this is pretty much 8 photographs where black people were killed by police officers on camera. And I went around the country photographing the 8 locations and then partner with a designer to kind of make it into book form. So this book that you see is actually, it opens to being a 20 by 24 inch print. And if you want to see it, there's some in the library here and I also have a few in my, like around with me. So it was cool. It was also very, like one of the least expensive books I ever made, even at that size because it was just staple bounds. And if you want to make a cheap book, make it staple bound. So yeah, these are like the murder scenes pretty much. And the idea was to photograph at the exact same time as they were murdered. So I went back at that time. Then I just started to, at that same point, just started to make a lot of books with people over the course of the years. We're not linear anymore. I'm just making a ton of work with a bunch of people. This guy's name is Ruben Wu. He's now very famous, actually. He uses a drone with a light on it to light scenes in the desert at night. Very inventive. I mean, he's pretty awesome. We worked with a photographer named Marina Young, who was photographing the last year of her relationship with a man who was becoming a woman. So yeah, we made a book about Harlem by a dude named Ruben Natal San Miguel, who has been photographing Harlem for 30 years, and he makes some of the better street scenes in Harlem. Like real things you can feel is why I was working with him. We've partnered with, I've made about 95, 100 books so far in the last 10, 11 years. I'm showing you a few. This is called On Death, and it was a partnership with a art organization named Humble Arts Foundation, and we pretty much did an open call for 45 artists to be part of this book, Pictures About Death, pretty much is what it was. We're doing a second book now that has an open call, and it's called Of COVID. So if you have pictures that are of COVID, then, submit. You can find all the information on our website. Yeah, so I was able to work with a lot of artists at once. It was the first time I did like a group show and a book, and it went really well. But now I can see that these things are uneven. There's like a size problem on these pictures. Like the one on the right's higher than the one on the left. See, this is why you have to work with good presses. COVID happens right after I make all those books, and I started to really think about changing the way, changing the artists I work with into being artists that are actually doing something about culture and the problems with our culture, pretty much. So I made a book with a dude named Laurent Chevalier, and this is called Enough, and it's a walk through the black neighborhoods in Brooklyn and New York City kind of talking about Black issues within the culture, as well as written. I mean, there was a poetry all the way through this book by a woman named Dr. Jamila Lyscott. And the poetry kind of flows with the images, which was really cool as well. Over the years, this goes back before COVID kind of, but I've made this series of books named Lost. This is the first series, and it's pretty much 10 photographers, 10 small books, 10 photographers photographing 10 cities around the world. And yeah, I did that one with 10, and then I did a book, like the year after, I did 20 books with 20 photographers. I would suggest not working with 20 artists at once. It's a lot. But now I'm doing it kind of again for another series of this, so maybe it's my fault. But yeah, so 20 places. This was not 20 cities, but 20 places that these people are familiar with or have worked in. So it was a cool project. This actually made the press a little bit like popular because there's so much good work in these books. Like we work with a woman named Wendy Redstar. I don't know if she's been here, but maybe, possibly. Maybe she needs to come here. There's some really great artists in here. And there's a woman named Mercedes Jelinek who has friends here. Yes, who's been at Penland and I guess everywhere. She goes everywhere. And then the third year, we worked with 8 photographers photographing 8 places across America. But this time, we went back in time. These are the books I have in my book bag if you see me. 2 of these books, they're place-based pretty much, but one is called Afghanistan, and that's pretty much about the story of how the United States missionaries led to the overthrow by Russia in Afghanistan. So it's a pretty cool book where you're seeing these photographs from a missionary himself then, and you're reading the story of his daughter telling the story about how the overthrow happens while these photographs are happening. So no one even knows this book exists, I think. No one cares. But I know it exists, so that's why I made it. And then there's a book named New York, which is pretty much a blast from the past, 1970s downtown Tribeca, or the Wall Street neighborhood when no one was there. Just empty streets in Wall Street in the 70s in black and white. So that was cool. I don't know how long have I been speaking? I have no idea. Oh, I still have time. Okay. A book by a photographer artist named Rachelle Mosman Solano, who is dealing with this is her mother, this is her, and she puts her mother in these domesticated scenes to kind of tell this story about how people of color have to work like this all the time. Made a book named Electronic Landscapes with 2 dudes named Isaac Diggs and Edward Hillel, and this is pretty much the story of techno in Detroit. Techno music started in Detroit, and the first part of this book is the landscapes of where they were playing that music outside. The second part of this book is the studios where the artists were making the music, and the third part is the artists themselves that made this techno music and brought it across the world, pretty much. And then there's a humongous glossary of information in the back that tells the full story of techno music being born in Detroit. So this is a great project for us, and they did some great work. This guy, his name is Marshall Shuttle. He is 100,000 times better than me at photography. And we went to the same school, and he was working in Vegas, so that's a Vegas carpet on the cover of his book. It's called Morning Star. That little star goes through I can't even show you, but we had to figure out how to die cut through 3 pages to make that star gold, because you open it and then there's a page with black stars and the cutout, and then you get to the next page and it's Morning Star written in gold, and that's where the gold's coming from 3 pages into the book. So that was a challenge, and I'm glad that they aligned it correctly for most of them. We did get 10 of those books that were completely upside down, but and didn't have that star for whatever reason. He was working in Vegas. He went out there to photograph because he felt like it was a lawless, crazy place. So he's still there making these photographs, but he was pretty much shooting these scenes with an 810 view camera. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but it is enormous and cumbersome and expensive. But he went into people's homes and did a lot of work there, and those pictures are glorious. When COVID starts, also, I decided to make a second book publishing company named Monolith Editions, and the first person we worked with, and Monolith is for devoted to people of color in the arts, so not just photography, but any art form. This is called Remember the South, and it was pretty much Frank Francis is the artist, and to simply put it, he's making still lifes about racist South. He's from South Carolina, and he's making still lifes that are kind of based on his childhood. So the left side of this, I don't know about the right side, I think that's just a sculpture, but the left side is pretty much Kool-Aid. So he makes these Kool-Aid drawings in real time, because they're kind of moving while he's shooting them. And there's a lot throughout the book. They act as chapter marks. We made a book with a dude named Giancarlo Montes Santangelo, who is standing in the middle of this photograph because this is an actual photograph. This is not a collage. He made this in a room and then photographed himself within it. So that's how he makes collages. And I think that he also works with a dude named Paul Sapuya, who's the left side of this picture, who's also an amazing photographer. We work with a photographer named Lauren Noel Oliver. Yeah, that's right. And also somebody that went to I always make books with people that went to my college also. Like every year, every 2 years, I'm definitely like working with my purchase college people just because they make great art. And she was photographing her family and boyfriend in like these awesome scenes. Work with with an artist named Rajni Pereira out of Toronto. This book is named Traveler, and it's pretty much like a futuristic look on what people will wear 1,000 years from now when the Earth is very different. You know, like these are really great. There's not enough examples here because this is like a very short talk, but did that. We made a book with a dude named Alex Christopher Williams, and the book is named Black Like Paul. Alex is a white passing black guy, and he has had a lot of problems with this over a whole life, and he's dealing with the issues of that in these like really kind of pretty incredible photographs. We made a book with a photographer named Nidia Blas, who's becoming super popular, teaches at Spelman. And this book is named Revival. And she pretty much focuses her career on photographing like black women in a great light. And she's getting better and better as the years go on. It's like really cool to see. So for me, it's like making these books, it's really great because I get to kind of work with these artists at some point in their career where I know that they're gonna continue and make some just amazing stuff in the future, but I'm glad that I was able to like be a part of that and help them through like even just a piece of a project. Made another poetry and photography book with a photographer named Mary Smith from England, who was dealing with depression during COVID, and this book came out like kind of during COVID, but what the designer decided to do is as the pages go on and the story unfolds and she becomes like less depressed, the pages get whiter as they go. Like so that kind of clears out this darkness as the book goes on. So have a good designer for books is all I'd say, because I could never figure out anything like that at all. And recently, this year, we made a book named Stranger Fruit with a dude named John Henry, who has been also same designer, does great work. This is gold if it's flat, but if you peel it back, you can see words in the spine. And he designed these dashes on the side of this book are what make the words on the spine. Kind of cool. He has photographed across the country black women holding their play dead black sons, like pietas pretty much. And yeah, so that was the book for him. We just have produced a second printing because we ran out of the first one way too quick. And the newest book is my own book called Privileged Mediocrity. And this is kind of a series about, it's a three-part series. One is a more abstract look at the problems of America, be that racism, infrastructure problems, gentrification, just issues of the American landscape. The second part of this book, the second part of this book is called The Southern Horror, and that's based on Southern Horrors by Ida B. Wells, made 100 years ago. And this is pretty much a story of, I went to go visit about 200 plus Confederate monuments over the course of a month during COVID, and this is a kind of glossary of all the Confederate monuments that I saw. I mean, I saw about 200, there's about 2,000 at that point, so there was a lot. You get to a point where you're looking at Confederate monuments and you can remember that you saw this one another state ago and it's the same monument. Like that's how they worked, and I think they're all being built in the north anyway. But and then the third part of this book is called, I call it latency, and it's pretty much the like overthrowing of these statues at some point. Like this first, this is a Columbus statue in Richmond, Virginia that was pulled into the water by a group of protesters in the middle of the daytime one day. Like they just had enough. It was great, and I got there like a few days later, sadly. But then I was there able to go there and shoot things that I got before and afters of. So it made it was a cool experience. And I think that's where we end here because I've talked too long, and now we can answer questions. But thank you for having me. You rock. Do we need this?
We'll need to. So thank you both so much. Does anyone have any questions? And if you do, I'll bring the mic to you.
And if you don't, we'll just keep talking.
We'll talk with the shared mic in between us.
You guys, that was great. I just have, for Kris, in the book that that had all the text about microaggressions, I wanted it for you to stay there for 1 second longer and ask, where did the text come from? And you said it was continuous. And can you speak a little bit about the relationship between the text and the image, the portraits?
The first book of Men was, that text was one video, like a 10-minute video that I made of a man's talking about this, like how he dealt with this discrimination in the hood or in the projects, where he was like, oh, well, what is it to be black when this mother has an Asian kid, black kid, white kid, and they're all the same poor, like this kind of, and you know, like, so that was what that story is about. So it goes over 7 pages in the book. So they're not related to the people that you're seeing. One of the people made that. But in the video form, there's this like video I made that's 20 minutes, and it tells this story of, well, it tells 15 different stories of discrimination by age. So you're hearing, it's the snippets until it gets to the end where you've heard the full story from 15 people, kind of. In the book with women, each like women that is next to that text has written that or spoken it to me. So it's completely about the people in the book or going through the situations, if that answers your question. Yeah.
What is your website, first of all?
KrisGraves.com. KrisGraves.com. But the books would be at kgpnyc.com.
Okay, can you say that again a little slower? Oh, okay. The next question I had was, could you discuss the different kinds of bindings and covers that you use?
We do a lot of different things. Well, we make softcover books, we make hardcover books. On softcover books, sometimes they are perfect bounds, which means that there's no signatures, just pieces of paper glued into the spine. Those would be digital offset books where you're making them for like less quantity, like maybe under 100 or 100 copies of something, where you're going to a press in America or Canada to produce that for pretty cheap. Once you're gonna make 300 copies of a book, it's impossible to afford it here, so you go to Europe or somewhere else, and then you make a signatured perfect bound book as a soft cover. The covers change. I mean, I usually use the same papers for interior all the time for all the books because I know I like this paper and I know what it's going to produce. So I use that same paper at different thicknesses depending on what the book needs. For the covers, it's usually like a paper named Munkin Polar. I mean, just a company named Munkin, and they make a very white stock paper named Polar. And I use that at 300 grams or 400 grams usually for covers of the book. If it's hardcover, it gets expensive, so sometimes we will print paper overboard that resembles cloth, and no one would be able to tell a difference. When you do that, because cloth, if you put an image in cloth, it's going to get messed up. But if you put an image on paper on the cover that looks like cloth, then it's going to last longer. So will all the foil stamping that you do on the cover on paper versus cloth. So cloth is actually like expensive for a reason why, you know, we don't use it very often. We make way more softcover books than hardcover just because there's no market. There's not really a big market for the hardcover books, especially if the person's not like famous, right? We've made books that have open spines, meaning like a Swiss bind, where you're like, you open the book, a softcover book, and it lays flat, and then you can lay the pages flat because the spine is open. But yeah, I don't know. That's a lot. I don't know what else I can say. We use the same papers for like everything, pretty much.
This question is for Leticia. So your career has sent you to like Arkansas, to Tennessee, to Indiana. Now you're in Oklahoma. How has moving across Middle America affected your career, your work, and your approach to building community?
Thank you so much. And yeah, I've moved a little bit. It's hard to move as a sculptor. We have a lot of crap. Right? Well, the line between a sculptor and a hoarder is a very fine one. It's one of an acknowledgement. It's been I mean, it's hard to move because then you leave a community, but I think one of the things that I really recognize is it helps me to remember that there are good people and maybe complicated people everywhere. And so it allows me to be able to continue to seek out new communities and have a different reach than if I'd stayed in one place. Now, you can still have a really broad reach from one place, but by inserting myself into other groups and other spaces, it allows me to be able to challenge myself, to have to make new friends. And I started off, we talked about this the other day, I was super shy as a child. Like I would like hide behind my mom's leg, and it's taken me a long time to start to. Linda mentioned it the other day, sort of like a like trained extrovert. You kind of find ways. And years ago, I started giving myself a requirement. I wasn't allowed to leave a gallery space if I was going to a show without meeting 3 new people. Like, I'm not allowed to leave this room until I meet 3 new people. And by doing that more and more at each of those spaces allowed me to have a broader and broader connection. And so I'm grateful to all those people because then they become part of your story too. And so by living in different places and then continuing to move, or whenever I go do a residency, reaching out to that community and creating a new team from that community allows me to be able to have more and more contacts. I love sitting down to sew CDs together with a whole new group of people and finding out their stories and finding out like the questions that they might ask that they wouldn't ask in this kind of situation because they're sitting next to me for hours sewing CDs. And so that's given me an opportunity to do and to continue to stay in touch. It creates a challenge to stay in touch, but I think today it allows for that. Like for today's talk, it gave me a chance. All those people I included, I've reached out to all of them to let them know I'm thinking of you. You made a difference. I don't know if that kind of answers your question, Michelle.
Where are you from?
Originally, Metropolis, Illinois. Hometown of Metropolis. Hometown of Superman. It's on the border of Illinois and Kentucky. 7,000 people. Middle of nowhere. They named it Metropolis because they thought it was going to be the next like Pittsburgh or Cincinnati. It was going to be a big city because Metropolis is the Greek word for big city. Mm-hmm. Jinxed it for life. Yes. But then it was the only metropolis on the map whenever the comic book and the TV show came out, and so they adopted it officially. And so when you drive there, if you go there, it's the hometown of Superman. And they have a festival. It's the Superman Festival in the summer. You know, other places have like the Strawberry Festival or something like that. No, the Superman Festival. Yes, but I think that has a lot to do with like my love of like objects, materials. I sort of cheer for the underdog in all cases and look for those dialogues that are behind those doors on those barren roads. Good. Oh, good idea. So smart. He's a photographer. It makes sense.
Oh, we got to get the Anderson wrench.
Oh yeah, there you go. Oh, I got a weird shadow on my nose.
It's your fault. All right, I'll do.
I don't want to interrupt your photo. No, I'm joking. So I have a question for Kris. As a publisher, you have a huge responsibility of what stories get told and what stories you're not choosing to leave out, but you're just prioritizing specific stories. Do you find that difficult? And how do you determine what stories you do tell and include in binding a book?
Yeah, I guess I'm a publisher, but I think we're more like a collaborator because I'm not publishing this for the world. I really am just, I think that these artists are really great for whatever reason that is. I mean, usually they just make better work than everybody else. That's how I feel. I mean, at least they've made a project that hits a piece that no one else is hitting, right? Like, it's very specific to them. They're making work that is not easily replaceable or remade by anyone else. It's not something you can see. It's something that was created or if it is in the wild, it's something that no one is looking at. So it's very specific, the pictures, I think, hopefully. I mean, some books, you know, it's relative because I see that way, but most people, I'm guessing a lot of other people wouldn't see the same way as I do. So I think it's all relative. I mean, who knows? I could be making the worst books on earth. I have no idea. But so I don't have any pressure. I feel no pressure because I say yes to the people that I want to work with and no to the people that I don't. And it's as simple as that. Like, there's no way that I will work with you if you don't make work that I think is work that's good, you know? So it's like an asshole thing to say, I think, but like, I'm very specific on what we choose to make because it's gonna be 2 years. I mean, it's gonna be like, if I decide to make this book, we're gonna be working together for at least 2 years. So it's a family at that point. You have to like really love a person. They can make great work and they're just a terrible human being to deal with. So I would never make that book, but yeah. So I guess, what was your first question? There was two questions there.
It was you touched on it. It was just like feeling the pressure of like, or just like having the responsibility of like what stories get told.
Yeah. Well, I think that because we only are now telling stories that like have some sort of meaning to culture, like before we could make, you know what, we've always kind of made culture, like, I stick with culture, so I'm good to go. If I wasn't making books about what was happening in the world right now, then we would make bad books.
I think we have time for one more question.
We can answer quickly. We can have a lightning round where we answer all the questions quickly. Yeah. If you have questions, just raise your hand and we'll have a lightning round. 2-word answers.
This one's for Kris, and it's kind of broad, but I was very impressed when you said that you ran that gallery at 25. So I was curious, what gave you the courage to kind of jump into things like that at such a young age?
Before that, what I didn't mention was that when I started working in the city around 2005 or 6, I was in Chelsea where all the arts are, and I went into this this gallery once, and it was empty, and I was like, why is this empty? And they're like, oh, we rent out this space every few weeks. So I was like, oh, that gave me an idea. I was like, I'll rent it out. How much does it cost? $2,500 for like 2 weeks. And I was like, I don't have $2,500. But maybe I can get like my friends and people that make great work to fill the space up with me for $150 a piece for 18 people or whatever. So whatever's left over, I'll just pay. You do that long enough, you end up with $10,000 of debt. But anyhow, I did that about 6 or 7 times over the course of a year. And that was the beginning of thinking about like art in that way, like being a manager or some sort of kind of art. Still didn't want to be a gallerist, but I wanted to connect people, and I always wanted to connect people. So for me, when the opportunity arose where my cousin was leaving his company, there was cheap rent in a building. We went on like, I think, Black Friday to that building to like just look into darkened galleries, and then they gave it to us for cheap, and that was it, 2 years or 3 years of that. For me, it was like, the pressure wasn't on me so much because I was so new and so young that people wanted to work with me. My people wanted to work with me, and they didn't really have any. Of course, everybody wants to sell, but that wasn't like major. It wasn't like you need to sell this stuff, right? I did my best, and sometimes that was not good enough, but that was it. I was just trial and error. I mean, I was working full time, ran that gallery, lived an hour and 20 minutes away, like hour and 10 minutes away from it at that point. So nights I'd go to the gallery, commute back home. Weekends I'd go to the gallery. So it was like a lot. But it just taught me a lot about art, for sure. So for me, it was like a learning experience. We got out of it. I didn't have any debt with that gallery, so it was fine. It's like, worked out all right. So for me, it was like I could do it. It was not breaking my bank, and I had some support. I don't think I could have done it without any. I mean, I definitely couldn't have done it without support, the space support. But hell, run something in your house if you want. It's like kind of, gallery doesn't have to be a gallery.
Leticia, I had a quick question for you. I'm wondering if, I'm thinking about the theremin and the use of that, and I'm wondering, why do you use that? Can you talk a little bit more about it? Go ahead.
Sure. One, if you've ever read up on the theremin or looked into the history of it, it was designed by a Russian engineer in the 1920s, and it was a surveillance system. And then he downsized it into an instrument and marketed it to RCA, and it was sold as the instrument of the future in 1928 and 1929. What's going on in the US that year? Right? Not a good time to come out with the instrument of the future. So it like 400 sold. And plus, it's actually really hard to play. You have to have like perfect pitch. And so it didn't really take off, but it was in the 1940s when in LA there was movies they were trying to make that were science fiction movies, and I'm a science fiction nerd. And so it was like, how do you have an ethereal background? What's the leitmotif of space? It can't be a piano because we understand fingers hitting those keys, or a drum or something like that. And so somebody knew someone who had a theremin, and they brought that in. And so all the early like science fiction films, sounds in the background were ethereal. And so it found its niche. And so sometimes it's just, you have to find the right group that helps you be able to find your path. And so that's one of the things I like about that story of the theremin, but also as a way that I could have interactivity in my sculpture. So the other part is I wanted something to be interactive within the piece, that you could perform the CDs, and the CDs could no longer be what holds the memory, but they could actually be the instrument. And so they got to be the horn. So that's the reason.
Thank you both. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.